It is Friday, September 9th here in Draft Shark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 1 DraftKings podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Smola. Jared, we're through one game. We're not sure yet whether Allen Robinson's still playing football, but we are to the first full weekend of DFS. I know that you're not a big preseason DFS player. I'm not either. So this is finally the beginning of DFS season, right?
I would kill to have the time to play preseason DFS, but I'm not even close to having the time to do that.
I've dabbled a little bit, and I think even if there's time, it's just the most potentially frustrating thing in the world. I think I would rather wait until the games are for real and we have a better idea of what teams actually want to do.
And I even stayed away from the showdown slate last night. I usually get sucked into some of those Thursday nighters, but I still haven't quite figured out showdown. So I'm gonna be focusing on the main slate this season. I've done my best work on the DFS main slates.
Yeah, I fortunately did not have time to get sucked into a showdown slate last night. I was just doing all the last minute stuff before the first kickoff of the season, the rankings entries, getting all my lineups set. I think the last lineup of mine got set at like 8:18 or something like that. So we're there though. The games have started and we're heading into our first full weekend of action. You can check the lineup generator on draftsharks.com right now. We cover various slates across FanDuel, DraftKings, and Yahoo. We're going to just be talking about DraftKings and FanDuel on here today because those are the ones that people are playing the most often. If you're new to the podcast, the stream version here, we're going to do DraftKings. Then we'll take like a 10-second break, fire up the FanDuel show because those are then going to be split into two separate shows for the audio portion that I'll push out as soon as I can after that. So, Jared, without pushing this off any further, let's jump into playing on DraftKings this week. We're going to go position by position. And quarterback, the first thing that jumped out to me is, as usual, cheap quarterbacks jump out more on DK than they do on FanDuel. And that's certainly true when you look at the dollars per point rankings this week on our site.
Yeah, what is it? Daniel Jones and Mitchell Trubisky topping the dollars per point rankings?
I almost puked when I saw them at first.
Yeah, I'm not going there in cash and in tournaments either, actually. Week 1 DFS almost feels like a different game sometimes. And obviously we have no information, the least information we're going to have all year. We have some information from preseason stuff that, we'll talk about. And also the pricing tends to be the softest of the season, or at least looks like the softest heading into it. There's guys like Michael Pittman who, seem $1,000 underpriced. Maybe that's wrong, but at least it, seems that way. So my point there being, I think we have the salary to spend up at quarterback this week. I think you want to probably spend up at quarterback because with the softer pricing, it's likely going to take higher scores to cash this week in both tournaments and GPP. So we want tournaments and cash games. So we want the upside at quarterback. I'm eyeing Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts in cash games. I'll lean towards Hurts because he's $500 cheaper, $6,800. Eagles with the fourth highest implied total on the main slate against a Lions defense that wasn't very good last year. I don't think it's going to be much better this year. I think, Hurts adding AJ Brown to the mix. He can do damage in the passing game and on the ground in this game.
Yeah, I would lean to Hurts as well. I agree that it's probably worth trying to pay up. And we have all of the teams that would normally be available. There's no buys. Obviously, you have the primetime games. But even, this year, there's only one Monday night game versus a doubleheader last year. So, lots and lots of players available. The scores will probably be higher. So I would shoot for upside over trying to get some savings there, especially when you look at the names that fill the cheap QB category. I guess if you had to go down cheap QBs, Jameis Winston might be most interesting to me against the Falcons, but again, not an area that I would prefer to dabble in. Jalen Hurts looks like he's going to be probably the highest owned quarterback, which makes sense when you compare his upside and his salary here. I don't think that matters for cash. I'm not going to worry about who's high or low owned. I'm just going to put in my best QB, right?
Yeah, for sure. And of course, high owned at quarterback, even in cash, might mean 20%. You're not going to see massive ownership at quarterback because you're only starting one each. So yeah, I don't worry about ownership at all in cash games, especially at quarterback.
Yeah, you will see ownership projections in the Draft Sharks lineup generator, so check all those out as you're building your own lineups. Is there anybody in the 5K range that you would consider in certain cash builds, or is it just strictly expensive QBs this week?
It's expensive quarterbacks for me this week because, again, I think there's spots we can save at the other positions. I do think Jones and Trubisky would be in play in tighter cap weeks just with the rushing ability both those guys have and the weapons both those guys have, especially Trubisky. But again, I just don't think you need those savings this week.
And Trubisky also does have some rushing, which Daniel Jones has too. So, maybe we'll look at those guys for the GPP side. I think if you were going in the cheap range, Carson Wentz at 5,500 is interesting. Trevor Lawrence at 5,600 is interesting. Trey Lance for 6K, Jared, what are you doing with him this week? 6K, 3% projected ownership. Is he interesting for you in any type of format here? Or are you just kind of waiting to see what happens and resting on how much you have him in season long?
I think he's viable in cash with the rushing. I'd rather just spend the extra 800 to get up to Jalen Hurts. Tournaments is where I think Lance is more interesting. I mean, the George Kittle absence obviously hurts both his pass catching ability and as a blocker. I mean, Kittle's absence is going to hurt San Francisco's run game, but you could see. I think it's going to be a run heavy game plan from the Niners on Sunday against the Bears, a game they should be able to control. But Lance could play a big part in that. Like, he could run for 80 yards and a couple scores, and at that ownership, I think Lance is definitely someone worth considering for tournaments.
Yeah, I'm surprised to see him so low in the projected ownership category specifically. So I'll be curious to see if that rises as we get closer to Sunday. But I think he's interesting. Not sure how much I would get to him there. More of like a few lineups type of player than a centerpiece, I would think, even if he stays at that low percentage.
For sure, yeah. So my favorite tournament play is Lamar Jackson. I mentioned him as a potential cash game option, but he's coming in at just 6% owned right now. With J.K. Dobbins likely out, if he plays, he's going to be limited on Sunday. We know Gus Edwards is out. It's going to be a Mike Davis and Kenny and Drake backfield. So I think that's going to push, one, the Ravens to throw more, and two, for Lamar Jackson to potentially play a bigger role in the rushing game than he usually does anyway. So, and the matchup against the Jets, they added some pieces this offseason, but I still think it's going to be a defense that we're attacking for much of the season. So I think Lamar Jackson is in a great spot. And just 6% ownership. So I think that makes him a great tournament, pivot off of someone like Jalen Hurts.
Yeah. And so are you stacking him with Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman, or one or the other, or just kind of mixing and matching?
Yeah. With a rushing quarterback like Lamar, I usually prefer to just single stack him. If you're in a smaller field, I think you can get away with the double stack because you don't need everyone to hit their absolute ceiling. So I would lean towards stacking Lamar with either Andrews or Bateman. I think both those guys, Bateman especially, I think we'll talk about later here, is a nice price on DraftKings.
Yeah, I would say that if you are playing a bunch of Lamar Jackson lineups in tournaments, you mix up what you do there, get some Mark Andrews, get some Rashad Bateman, maybe stick a one or two in there that have both of those guys, just in case, everything comes together in this game. That should be more pass leaning than Baltimore might want to be, because Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake look like the top two running backs heading into this game. And, Mark Andrews is a bit of a pivot from Travis Kelce, who's likely to be popular this week as well. We'll get to those guys a bit later. I think that if you are looking in the cheap range here, and again, you want to chase points, but I think that the Washington-Jacksonville game is interesting. We have 1% ownership projections on both quarterbacks, Carson Wentz, Trevor Lawrence, both in the middle of the 5K range. We got Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson on the Wentz side. We've got Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram as options on the Trevor Lawrence side. Are three touchdowns totally out of the question for either of these quarterbacks? I don't think so. I mean, obviously, I'm not projecting that for either of these guys, but there is some scoring upside in this game where both defenses were very soft last year. There's some cheap stacking options. And then, around that, you have more flexibility to put in lots of those higher price studs for maybe the more attractive games.
Yeah, Lawrence is definitely the guy I'd be more interested in that game. If he can give you 25 points and then you can, avoid like a 35-point game from Hurts or Mahomes or one of those studs, I think that could be enough for a Lawrence team to win you a tournament. The cheap guy I had, and for me, it'd only be in like these, huge tournaments that the millionaire maker on DraftKings, but Matt Ryan, $5,500. Colts with the third highest implied total on the main slate, and everyone's going to play Jonathan Taylor, expecting him to do most of that damage. If Ryan just happens to get, 3 of the 4 Colts touchdowns, then, that one Hurts Taylor is going to be high owned, and 2 is obviously good news for Matt Ryan. So, and again, Michael Pittman we'll talk about is a good value. He's going to be chalky, but I think stacking Pittman with Ryan, Ryan's going to be, 2 or 3% owned. So I think you could play chalky Pittman stacked with Matt Ryan.
Mm-hmm. So moving to running back now, somebody who's going to be chalky is Saquon Barkley. And again, we don't worry about that on the cash side. Yep. 6,100 for him. He sits at the top of our DK dollars per point projections. And I think Saquon Barkley is a lot more interesting for cash lineups on DraftKings with the full PPR than he is on FanDuel with half PPR. I don't think that I'm nearly as interested in him there just because of the potential real weakness of the Giants offense. Here, though, where there's plenty of reception upside, I think Barkley at 6,100 is a pretty good starting point for one of your running back slots.
I'm starting my cash builds with two running backs that are on what figured to be pretty bad offenses, Saquon Barkley and Najee Harris. I'm just, especially in cash games, I'm chasing volume at running back. We have Harris projected for 23 touches this week. We have Saquon projected for 20 touches this week. Those are both top 10 marks among main slate running backs. Najee's 12th among running backs in DK salary. Saquon Barkley 15th. I just think they're both underpriced for the volume that we're expecting them to get.
I agree. I have Najee Harris down as well. $6,400. He is a workhorse. We've seen it. There's no reason to believe that'll be different this year. The only difference is we don't know what the Pittsburgh offense is going to look like. So both guys that should remain involved, even if their offenses fall behind and are throwing the ball a lot. So I agree. Both of those guys look good for building around at their 6K salaries. On the GPP side, I think that James Conner at 7,000 is projected for 4% ownership, way too low. He's 5th in our DK dollars per point projections. And like we said with Harris and with Barkley, Conner is going to be a workhorse. We're not going to get 15 Eno Benjamin opportunities in this game. We're going to get lots of James Conner. We're going to get him against a Chiefs D that was weak against everything last year and has been weak for several years against the run. So we could get a good Conner game. We can run Conner in lineups with Chiefs players. I'm surprised, but I guess not surprised based on how his ADP is gone, that his ownership rate is not higher here.
I was going to say the same thing. I would not be surprised if that ownership climbs a bit as people realize that Rondale Moore at this point looks like he's not going to play on Sunday. We know DeAndre Hopkins is out. We'll see about Zach Ertz with his calf injury. But, the Cardinals offense is going to run through James Conner and Marquise Brown on Sunday. Brown's getting the ownership bump. He's going to be popular. Conner is not. And you're right. I think people just don't like James Conner. We saw that in draft season with him dropping into the 4th round quite often. So I'll be curious to see what the ownership actually comes in at. I have Conner as a cash game option. Even for me, it's Conner or Christian McCaffrey kind of for my third cash game running back. So when I have a cash game play at running back that I see come in at 4%, that's like an awesome tournament play to me.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And then on the lower salary end, if you are trying to fit in, Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews at tight end, I think AJ Dillon at 5,300 looks interesting here. He's projected for less than half of Aaron Jones's ownership. He's $1,400 cheaper than Aaron Jones. And with Alan Lazard now, I forget if he's out or doubtful for this game, but either way, not likely to play in this game. So it only helps an offense that would likely be leaning toward the running backs more than last year's version anyway. So AJ Dillon, I'm not sure he makes it into cash view, but I think he's very interesting for upside on a tournament team.
Yeah, Lazard did not practice again Friday. I haven't seen Green Bay's final injury report, but I'd be surprised if he plays. You're going to see a really running back-centric game plan for the Packers. You could see Jones and Dillon combined for 40-plus opportunities. So I like both those guys. You're right. Jones is going to be more popular, but I think at $6,700 that Jones is worth considering too. I like Travis Etienne on the lower side, $5,600. He's actually our second best dollars per point value, coming in with 13% projected ownership. So not low owned, but that's not enough to get me off of him. And hopefully that, the James Robinson news, the fact that he's going to play and Doug Peterson saying he might play a big role, hopefully that knocks some people off Travis Etienne. I'm not really buying James Robinson. I mean, we just saw Cam Akers 15 months removed from an Achilles last night do absolutely nothing. So I'd be surprised if James Robinson does much in this one. I think you could get, 20 touches out of Travis Etienne with a lot of that coming in the passing game.
And that, of course, came with Sean McVay saying both of these guys are starters, but I guess Cam Akers is not so much.
Right.
Damian Pierce at $4,800. There were plenty of people saying, is Damian Pierce going to be week 1 chalk? 4% projected ownership right now. And that he's facing a Colts defense that was tough against the run last year, but it's also a defense that's going to be missing Shaquille Leonard, who has been ruled out for the game. So I don't know, Jared, what are you using Damian Pierce at all here? Or is it just like it doesn't really fit this week?
Well, keep an eye on the ownership projections. Those, will be updated again before Sunday. If Pierce is going to be 4%, I will definitely consider him in tournaments. I mean, we know the downside. The downside is the Texans fall way behind, and it's Rex Burkhead playing in obvious passing situations. Pierce looked awesome in the preseason. I buy that he's the clear lead runner. That the Shaquille Leonard injury, obviously is a boost to the matchup. So again, if I thought he'd come in at for sure double digits, maybe like 15% owned. But again, if he's going to be for even 6, 7, 8% owned, I think he's worth considering because he's $4,800. That's a nice price tag for a clear lead runner.
And I know that the Colts are favored by a lot here, but there's a chance that this is a competitive game.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, Texans O-line, I think, is better than people are giving it credit for right now. They are home, I believe, right? It's a division game. Weird stuff happens. It's the NFL. That could definitely be a close game into the fourth quarter.
Wide receiver, and oh baby, before we get to the chalk that you were talking about, Romeo Doubs tops the DK dollars per point projections in the Draft Sharks lineup generator, $3,000 this week. I just mentioned, and I just checked, Allen Lazard is officially doubtful for this game, so almost definitely not playing. 3K Romeo Doubs. I'm not sure that I need him in cash this week, but I'm certainly going to be watching to see just how high his ownership projection climbs.
Yeah, again, check the updated ownership. We still have him at 1%, but that's, before we got this latest Lazard news. So that's obviously going to climb. I don't think it'll climb too high just because there's so many solid wide receiver options this week. I'll definitely be considering Doubs in tournaments. I think if you're going cheap in cash, I still prefer Jahan Dotson just because we know he's going to be an every down player. We saw it in the preseason. He ran a pass route on every single one of the first team pass plays. So I think he's the safer cheap bet, Jahan Dotson at $3,400, but I do think Doubs has more upside.
Plus, he can be the run back in those monster Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram lineups.
That's a cheap stack. You can load up everywhere else if you stack that up.
You can just put Derrick Henry at every single other position in that lineup. Jahan Dotson, 3,400, as you mentioned. Kadarius Toney, 4,100, also up there in our DK dollars per point. But for cash, Jared, I think what you really love this week are the cheap wide receiver ones. You mentioned Michael Pittman at $5,500. Rashad Bateman is $5,300. I think those two guys look like cash lineup building blocks.
Yeah, those are my three guys. Dotson, Rashad Bateman, $5,300. Again, I expect a pass heavier game plan from the Ravens, and I think Mark Andrews and Rashad Bateman will be the clear top two options in that passing game. Then Michael Pittman, I mean, at $5,500, that the concern would be the Colts do win in blowout fashion, and Matt Ryan only throws it 25 times. Even then, I think you're going to get 7 to 8 targets out of Michael Pittman. So I think he's a cash game lock at that price.
Mm-hmm. On the GPP side, we're talking about cheap wide receiver ones. I don't think Elijah Moore is as much of a wide receiver one as a lot of people want him to be, but at $5,100, he's probably their top wide receiver, if not a clear number one wide receiver. And maybe he does get targeted like a clear number one wide receiver in this game. He did get to play with Joe Flacco last year for a brief time. It went very well. I'm not going to take those numbers and turn them into expectations for this year, but it would at least not be unprecedented for things to go well between Joe Flacco and Elijah Moore. They get the matchup with Baltimore, which was terrible against the pass last year. The Ravens should be a lot better against the pass this year, but what if they're not all the way better? What if they do at least start out the season a little soft on that front? And this is also a matchup where the Ravens are favored by quite a bit. So the Jets should be trailing, should be throwing the ball quite a bit. Elijah Moore, not high in the ownership projections right now, which I was surprised by. Maybe that changes as we get closer to Sunday, especially for GPP fields. But right now, he looks very interesting right here.
Yeah, 4% for Elijah Moore in our current ownership projections. It looks like Juju Smith-Schuster at 12% is kind of soaking up all the ownership in that range. I love Elijah Moore as a run back on your Ravens stacks. You go Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, and run it back with Elijah Moore and hope that he kind of puts up some points in garbage time after Lamar does his damage. So I like the Elijah Moore call. Rashad Bateman, by the way, just 6% projected ownership. Again, a cash game play coming in with that type of ownership. I think that makes him an excellent tournament option. Two other guys I have in the 6Ks, Mike Williams coming in at just 5% ownership in what should be a shootout against the Raiders. The Chargers have the second highest implied total of the main slate. We know Mike Williams is the type of guy you want in tournaments, the big play guy, the guy who's going to see work in the red zone. And then AJ Brown, again, for your Jalen Hurts stacks. I like AJ Brown, even just, solo AJ Brown without Jalen Hurts. I like this matchup against the Lions. It was a bad wide receiver defense last year. I don't think it's going to be much better this season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like all of that. Over to tight end for cash, Dallas Goddard at 4,500 looks like a solid starting point. I think you can go down to several guys in the 3K range if needed. Gerald Everett, 3,800, Cole Kmet, 3,700. But, you're talking about the ownership level and the soft pricing. And I think the ownership projections we're talking about, even the highest owned guys are in the mid-teens. And I think that's reflective of the week that we were talking about before, where all the teams are available. There's not a whole lot of info to go on versus what we'll have, 6 weeks from now. So I don't know that we're going to see anybody get oppressively owned. Even, Travis Kelce at this position, he's probably one of the better bets to get to that area, but even he's probably not going to be as high as he might be in the same situation by mid-season.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think you can be flexible at tight end and cash this week. I think there's options at all three price levels. You named Kelce at the top. I think $6,600 is a nice price for him. I think with all the new weapons in Kansas City, Mahomes might lean even more heavily on Kelce early on this season. So I think if you want to go expensive at tight end, that's where you go. I think Dallas Goddard's my kind of my first guy, and I'm going to try to make him work at $4,500. I love Goddard in general this season. Nice matchup against the Lions, who were not good against tight ends last season. Goddard, 6 catches for 72 yards in last year's meeting against Detroit, and that was despite Jalen Hurts throwing it just 14 times in what was a blowout win. So, Goddard was in line for a huge game if that game had stayed closer. And then if you do want to go cheap, I think Evan Ingram is the cash game play at $3,500. We're buying him playing a big role in this passing game. He's healthy for now. Matchup's fine against Washington. Super cheap. He can help you fit in a lot of other high-priced guys.
I only didn't mention him yet because I was planning to mention him on this other side, because I'm wondering if Evan Ingram at $3,500 and 1% projected ownership is a joke and somebody's trolling me in our lineup generator.
People hate Evan Ingram. I mean, it's not a surprise to me. He's not going to be chalky. He might come in at 3-4%, but I don't think he's going to be chalk. Yeah,
but 1%. I think I was wondering if Kevin jumped into the admin just to screw with me and faked that number, because if Evan Ingram is that much lower than all of the other tight ends, then it's going to make me play him in every single lineup, and I'll probably end up losing money when he only scores 7 points for the week.
I was going to say, me and you combined might push Evan Ingram's ownership above 1% in these tournaments.
Anybody else for tournament tight end?
So I like Mark Andrews as a Lamar Jackson stack. The fact that he's $200 more expensive than Kelce is going to keep people off him. We have Andrews projected at 6% owned right now. That's less than half of Kelce's ownership. So I like that. And then Darren Waller, I like $5,400. That seems like a nice price. He's just 8% projected owned. The Chargers 28th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends last season. Again, I think that's going to be a shootout. You could, stack up, Darren Waller and then have Mike Williams on the opposite side of that game, and hopefully get a big piece of what should be a high scoring game.
And he would be not cash. He would be GPP only for me because of the hamstring. Yes. We have to assume it was really a hamstring injury and not a contract dispute injury.
Yeah,
but that makes him too iffy for a cash lineup for me.
Yeah. I mean, even if we assume it's a hamstring, it was a hamstring. He's off the injury report this week.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not super concerned about his health, but
right.
he is still just a tournament play for me, because I'd rather go up to Kelce or down to Goddard in cash.
Yeah, I agree with that. On defense, Jared, are you playing minimum price Lions 2K against the Eagles this week as they sit at the top of our DK dollars per point?
I'm not. I think you can. Again, I think you can afford to go up a little bit. I'm not going too much higher this week, but I'm going to go up to the Dolphins at $2,600.
Mm-hmm.
Miami led all main slate defenses in DraftKings points per game last season. I was actually surprised when I saw that, just, building out lineups this morning. Defensive scoring is so volatile from season to season. I wouldn't expect Miami to lead again this season, but it is a reminder that, it's a talented defense. They're at home. They're favorites. They get a Patriots offense that struggled throughout August by all reports, and we saw it in the preseason. So I think Miami is a nice value play this week.
Yeah, they're a high upside defense. They have a lot of guys that can sack the quarterback, and Mac Jones and the offense have been terrible in preseason. So it's a good spot for them at home. I agree. It might be my favorite. I think the Bears at 2,200 are also interesting at home against Trey Lance. If you don't want to play the Lions just because of their minimum price, the Bears are pretty close to it. And, Trey Lance, very talented, but also erratic. So we could see this game. He could have a good rushing day and still turn the ball over 3 times in this game. And then just above that, I think Washington and Jacksonville at 2,500 facing each other, both viable plays in that cheap defense range.
Yeah, I really like the Bears call. like you said, Trey Lance, obviously much less proven than Jalen Hurts. The 49ers O-line, like way, way worse than Philly's. Philly has one of the best O-lines in the league. The Niners might have one of the worst. So I like that Bears call. It just takes a few big plays for them to pay off. On the tournament side, if you want to pay up, I think the defense on the other side of that game is one of the best plays of the week in the 49ers. Just a massive mismatch with their pass rushers versus the Bears O-line. So $4,100. But again, it's easier to afford a defense like that this week where the pricing is softer. And then the Panthers defense I like too at $3,400. There's some talent on that defense, I think, and they're playing Jacoby Brissett. So if Carolina gets out to a lead, forces the Browns to throw up more than they want to, I think there's upside to the Panthers.
Yes, I actually just drafted the Panthers defense for that matchup, primarily in an FFPC main event draft this afternoon. So I agree for sure with that. That's it for the DraftKings show. As I said, we're going to be doing the FanDuel one after a brief break just to switch over. But head to draftsharks.com, check out the lineup generator, and check out all of the DFS content. Jared and Kevin have articles both for DraftKings and FanDuel. So we've got what you need, and we're there to answer questions. Join the DraftSharks Discord to get to us individually and ask us the lineup questions that you have heading into the weekend. For Jared Small and the rest of the DraftSharks crew, I'm Matt Schauf saying thanks so much for swimming with us. It is Friday, September 9th here at DraftShark Studios in Rochester, New York. Welcome to our Week 1 FanDuel podcast. I'm your host, Matt Schauf. With me, as always, is Jared Small. And Jared, we're ready for the second half of our Friday DFS shows. It is the FanDuel site, and the quarterbacks look probably most different among all the positions if you switch over from DraftKings to FanDuel in the DraftSharks lineup generator. Cheap quarterbacks lead the way on the DK side, and that tends to be the case throughout the season where the pricing is a little bit tougher and you need to squeeze out the savings. FanDuel this week, though, the top three guys in dollars per point, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Justin Herbert, all 8K plus, and that's probably the group that I'm going to be picking my cash quarterback from.
Yeah, quarterback pricing just always flatter on FanDuel. The gap between the high end and the low end just isn't as big. And, the lineup generator is not taking this into account, but I think pricing also tends to be softer on FanDuel. So you can, it's easier to fit in guys you want to fit in. So it makes more sense to pay up at quarterback. So same two guys for me on FanDuel as I talked about on DraftKings, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. Lamar Jackson, $500 more. So maybe you start with Jalen Hurts in that nice matchup against the Lions, big implied total for the Eagles. I think the Eagles are going to have success through the air and on the ground, largely with Hurts in this game. So you start with Jalen Hurts. If you can afford, the extra $500 with Lamar Jackson, I do slightly prefer him just straight up. But again, I think they're both good values. Both guys give you big ceilings and nice high floors for cash games.
Yes, I agree. I like both of those guys. And the rushing points me in those directions over Justin Herbert, although there's certainly nothing wrong with playing Justin Herbert. And all these guys have pretty clear stacking options. It's not mandatory that you stack with a quarterback in a cash lineup, but it certainly makes things easier to take care of one pass catching position. I do think, Jared, that if you're playing Lamar Jackson or Jalen Hurts, it's even a little bit more viable to run either guy naked than it might be to do so with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, especially in cash, even in tournaments, and you can play these Russian quarterbacks without a stacking partner. I don't usually do it, but it's possible to win that way.
Mm-hmm. Kyler Murray also in the mix, 8,200. I don't think he quite matches Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, especially for the matchup for me. And we don't care about the ownership really here, especially for cash. So, and especially in head-to-heads versus like 50-50s, larger field double ups. So not looking at those numbers at all and determining which quarterback to play in cash lineups, right?
Correct. And I'm just off Kyler this week because his weapons are pretty depleted, right? I mean, we know there's no DeAndre Hopkins. It looks like Rondale Moore is not going to play. Zach Ertz, we'll see how he's listed on the final injury report. But I don't expect a ceiling game from Kyler this week.
And we will talk about how you might still be able to play the Cardinals as we get to another position here in a minute. On the GPP side, I mean, I'm still chasing the ceiling of the 8K guys that we already talked about. I think GPP, you're doing more different lineups, so I would mix and match and have exposure to all these guys. And Patrick Mahomes enters that mix as well. It looks like he's going to be higher owned, though, than Lamar Jackson. So I think I'm probably leaning more towards stacking Ravens than stacking Chiefs here.
Yeah, Lamar Jackson at 7% projected own is very attractive. I'm definitely going to be playing him in tournaments. The Mahomes ownership projection surprises me a bit, just the fact that he is the highest priced quarterback on this slate. We saw him, regularly go behind Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert and even Kyler Murray sometimes in fantasy drafts. I'd be a little surprised if Mahomes comes in higher owned than Lamar Jackson, especially. I think I'm going to play some Mahomes own. Just hope he comes in a bit lower. The Chiefs kind of surprisingly easily have the highest implied total on for the entire week, and definitely on the main slate. They're like 1.5 points ahead of the second highest team, which is the Chargers. So Vegas expects the Chiefs, even without Tyreek Hill, to put a bunch of points this week. And if they do, there's a good chance Mahomes is a big part of that.
We talked about not bothering to double stack with the running quarterbacks. Mahomes can run, but he's a lot less of a running quarterback than Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts. So I think if you're playing Mahomes in a tournament, you're almost definitely putting Travis Kelce with him. Are you also putting a wide receiver with him?
Yeah, I would tend to double stack Mahomes because of the price he's at. If you're playing a quarterback price that highly, you need him to put up, 30 points to pay off. And if he does that, he's likely going to have, 2 big games from 2 of his pass catchers.
Do you have a favorite that you're playing in those Mahomes lineups?
It's Juju for me. I know you probably don't love it, but I think Juju is the best bet to lead the wide receivers and targets this week.
I didn't even check the pricing on him versus MVS this week. So 5,200 for Juju. MVS checks in at 4,700. It's not a huge gap.
That's DraftKings you're looking at. It's Juju 64 and MVS 55.
So even a little bit bigger gap between them. I see what I like about MVS is the downfield ability over Juju. So I would probably lean that way, but it's not a strong lean because we're all just guessing as to who gets the targets among these guys. And I mean, maybe McCole Hardman comes in as the lowest owned guy and, winds up blowing up the play just because of that.
Hardman 5,400. It's about the same price as MVS, and Hardman and MVS will be much lower owned than Juju. So if you're in a big tournament like the Millie Maker, I would lean towards MVS. I tend to now play like the smaller field, 1,000 entry, 2,000 entry tournaments. So there I'm a bit less worried about ownership. So again, that's why I lean towards Juju. But in the massive tournaments, I think MVS makes a lot of sense at the cheaper price and lower owned.
And for what it's worth, since we're talking about ownerships right now, we talked about Mahomes being high relative to other quarterbacks, but none of the quarterbacks is really set for high enough ownership that it should push him out of your plans if you want to play him, I would say.
For sure. Agreed.
Trevor Lawrence, 1%, by the way, at 7K. If you don't want to pay up for the top priced quarterbacks, not sure how much I'm going to actually do that, but 1% for him and affordable prices for Christian Kirk, Travis Etienne, Evan Ingram here.
Yeah, I'll throw out Matt Ryan again. I think with the high implied total for the Colts, if those touchdowns come via the pass, Ryan could surprise. And he's not going to go for 30, but if he gives you 24, that could be enough.
Running back Derrick Henry, $9,700. He's likely to be either the highest or second highest owned running back. Jonathan Taylor's up there as well. Jared, does that matter on cash? Are you changing anything for Derrick Henry, either because of that price tag or because of ownership?
Not because of ownership. I do think these elite running backs are priced up more on FanDuel than they are on DraftKings. So I'm actually more likely to play, at least like Christian McCaffrey on DraftKings, than I am to play one of these elite running backs, especially in cash games on FanDuel.
Derrick Henry is definitely going to be in the mix. I'll do a little bit more lineup building before seeing if I'm staying on him at 9,700. But I mean, he could have an absolute monster game against the Giants. Certainly, if you're playing a head-to-head, I guess it's more possible to win without that monster game. But if you're facing Derrick Henry in a monster game, it's going to be tough to pull away in that matchup.
Yeah, it's always scary to be fading Derrick Henry, which I tend to do often. I'll probably end up doing it again this week, but we'll see how it goes. Saquon Barkley is still my starting point on FanDuel. I know you talked about. I do think he's a better play on DraftKings with the full PPR, but to me, $6,800 for a guy who I 5 catches still helps on FanDuel. It's half PPR, and I think you're going to get 15 to 18 carries out of Saquon. We've heard the O-line was good, especially in run blocking in camp. I'm still super optimistic about Saquon. I think this could very likely be the cheapest that Barkley is all season.
I'm optimistic about Barkley, but I also don't know about the Giants' chances of finding the end zone. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, then he's going to need to catch 10 passes for it to really make up for it on FanDuel.
That's fair.
And really, looking around the top of the FanDuel dollars per point projections, I don't see a whole lot of cash-friendly guys. Like we talked about Barkley, we talked about Najee Harris on the DraftKings side. I think just like with Barkley, Najee Harris is less attractive on FanDuel than he is on DK, where we don't get full credit for the receptions.
Yeah.
I guess I like, I don't know. They both have pretty decent matchups on the defensive side. Like the Titans aren't a scary defense. It's more a worry about the Giants offense. Kind of similar with Pittsburgh. The Bengals aren't good on defense. Maybe they'll be better than last year. But it's a question of how good the Steelers offense is. I guess I probably believe in the Steelers offense more than the Giants offense heading into the season. We'll see whether that's right or wrong.
I hope it's wrong because I still have a lot invested in the Giants. But yeah, and on FanDuel, Najee's not underpriced to me on FanDuel like he is on DraftKings. $8,200 for Najee. That's a fair price. It's not a price I'm jumping all over myself to get him. I'd rather play James Conner and Aaron Jones, who are Conner's $500 cheaper, Aaron Jones $800 cheaper. I'm more likely to play Damian Pierce on FanDuel than I am on DraftKings. He's cheap here too. He's $5,400. Again, it's half PPR, so his potential lack of pass catching usage is less of a concern on FanDuel.
I also agree with James Conner being in the mix in both cash and tournament lineups, $7,700. Dalvin Cook, I think, is also attractive as a top tier running back who's not as top tier priced as Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, Christian McCaffrey, $8,400. So he's just $200 more than Najee Harris. I think Dalvin Cook is more attractive than Najee Harris in that price range.
Yeah, I agree. Especially for tournaments, I like Dalvin Cook. 115 total yards in a score in his first game against the Packers last season. The second game was that Sean Mannion debacle where Cook was game scripted out of it. But yeah, I do think Cook's healthy. I think they're gonna lean on him for as long as he's healthy.
And Nick Chubb at $7,800 is somebody to not forget. I think he's always. It's not comfy to put him in a cash lineup, and it might not generally be a good idea, but this Browns team this week with Jacoby Brissett as the week 1 starter and against the Panthers team that I don't think is going to run up the score, we'll see. Maybe I'm underestimating them, but I think we should get plenty of Nick Chubb carries this week. Probably still just a GPP play until we see exactly how the backfield gets split between him and Kareem Hunt, especially because Kareem Hunt does factor in near the goal line and not just between the 20s.
That's exactly what I was going to say. I think that's what hurts Chubb, especially on FanDuel. And we're looking for the touchdowns, the fact that he doesn't dominate those goal line looks. So Chubb would be tournament only for me. I'm going to consider Eli Mitchell in tournaments as well. $6,700. This is the place you want to play him on FanDuel where it's only half PPR. We haven't projected it just 2% owned. Elijah Mitchell, he had the hamstring thing in August, but he's healthy now. He's not on the injury report right now. And last year when Elijah Mitchell was healthy, like they gave him the ball. He had 17 plus carries in 9 of his 11 games last season. Again, this should be a super run heavy game plan from the Niners with no George Kittle in a game they should still control against the Bears. So you could pretty easily get 18, 20 carries out of Elijah Mitchell.
Mm-hmm. And, we already mentioned James Conner, but the ceiling is high. The ownership is probably going to be lower than it should be. So he's certainly going to be in my GPP plans. Najee Harris, I think, more interesting as a GPP play because of that $8,200, but not really going to be a spotlight player, especially nearly as much as James Conner. Wide receiver, there are lots of nice options on FanDuel in the 6K range this week, and they can help with those expensive running backs and the expensive quarterback that we talked about before, and the tight ends that we kind of hit on already. But we've got Rashad Bateman at $6,100, Mike Williams at $66, Adam Thielen at $61, DJ Moore at $64, Brandon Cooks at $66, even Christian Kirk at $5,800, I think is cash viable depending on how much savings you need, because he looks like the best bet to be a pretty clear number 1 wideout for the Jaguars.
Yeah, I like those guys. Bateman and Mike Williams are top 2 wide receivers in dollars per point. Mike Williams is the same price on FanDuel as he is on DraftKings, which you don't see very often. He's even a better play on FanDuel because he's less of a volume guy, more of a big play touchdown guy. So I love Bateman and Mike Williams. DJ Moore is the other guy I'm leaning towards right now, $6,400. Not an ideal matchup against the Browns. The Browns did just place Greedy Williams on IR, though, one of their starting corners. So that helps Moore's matchup. But really, he's just a volume play. Good bet for 8 to 10 targets for $6,400.
Yeah, and Greedy Williams should be their third corner this year. So I agree with the picks in that range. I think DJ Moore is probably a better play than he feels like. You know, he just kind of gets lost in the mix because nobody's excited about the Panthers passing game. But 6,400, a clear number one wideout. And if Baker Mayfield could be the best quarterback, he probably should be the best quarterback that DJ Moore will have played with in his still young career. So, you know, we might be about to hit a breakout season for DJ Moore.
He's scoring at least 5 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, maybe a huge year. By the way, before we get too far away from the running backs, I just saw that J.K. Dobbins is questionable for week 1. So we've been kind of treating him lately like he's not going to play. You know, still might not, but at least there's a chance.
Yeah, I'd rather have him be out so people play Mike Davis and Kenny and Drake because I don't want anything to do with that backfield regardless of if Dobbins plays or not.
I agree. GPP side, Elijah Moore at 6K, Darnell Mooney at 6,200. They enter that mix with the other guys I mentioned. I think that they're, you know, lower floor plays than the wide receivers that I mentioned for cash. But when we get to the GPP side, I think these two have just as much upside as most of the wideouts over there. And especially because they could both be, they could both wind up being dominant number one targets for their quarterbacks this week.
Who are the two guys? Elijah Moore and who's the other one?
Elijah Moore and Darnell Mooney for the Bears.
Mooney, okay. Yeah. Those guys are in play. I'll mention Bateman again just because he's 8% owned only. Again, he's our second best dollars per point value coming in, just 8% owned. So I really like Bateman in tournaments as well. We haven't talked about Hollywood Brown on either of these shows yet. I mean, he's not going to be low owned. We have him at 15% on FanDuel. I still think he's worth considering at $6,900 just because, again, all these injuries on the Cardinals side should be a high scoring game against the Chiefs. The Cardinals probably going to be playing from behind. They're probably going to be playing catch up. Like, you know, Marquise Brown could get 12 targets in this game. I would not be surprised. So I do think he's worth considering. Again, you know, you don't want to play Marquise Brown alongside a bunch of other chalky guys, but if you can mix in a low-owned guy or two, then you can definitely still play Marquise Brown. Last guy on my list there, Brandon Cooks, another guy we haven't talked about yet. Just $6,600 on DraftKings. I think we both expect him to still be the clear, you know, top guy in this passing game. The line says the Texans should be playing from behind. You know, maybe they have to throw it 40 times. You can get, you know, 10 to 12 Cooks targets in that case.
At tight end, Jared, on FanDuel, everybody's either going to be playing Kyle Pitts at 6K or Travis Kelce at 8K, right?
Yeah, to me, it's Pitts pretty easily. Like, I'm going to take the $2,000 savings, especially with Drake London either out or limited. Like, you know, and the matchup's not good against the Saints, but if you give me 8+ Kyle Pitts targets for $6,000, I'm just going to play that in cash.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he's probably going to get the number one corner for the Saints, but if you're getting a bunch of targets, then it's, you know, worth chasing, and we'll see what happens. Probably not on the GPP side for me because of the high ownership and the chance that he could have 10 targets and catch 3 of them. But, you know, he's in the mix. We do have Dallas Goddard close to those guys in projected ownership. He's 5,700, so just 300 cheaper than Kyle Pitts. Probably enough upside that he will pull some of that ownership away. I think in cash games, it's Pitts, Goddard, and also TJ Hawkinson in the mix. You know, just all fairly safe bets for targets and production.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I think I like the fact that Goddard's priced so closely to Pitts for tournaments, at least. I think that, you know, is going to make Goddard lower owned on FanDuel here than, you know, he will be on DraftKings.
GPP, I wonder, is Mark Andrews like the spotlight play over Travis Kelce, and maybe that pushes you toward more Lamar Jackson than Chiefs here because we've got $100 less in salary for Andrews. You mentioned he's more expensive than Kelce on DK this week. He's projected for less than half of Kelce's ownership. Lamar Jackson's projected well below Patrick Mahomes in FanDuel ownership. You know, we'll see about J.K. Dobbins, like I said, but it's looking like it's Mike Davis and Kenyon Drake. So we could get a good bit of Baltimore passing. I feel like this Baltimore stack is kind of at the center of my tournament plans here.
Me too. If this ownership holds, I'm hoping it does. But Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews, Rashad Bateman, I'll probably have, you know, one team that's a double stack, and maybe one team with Lamar to Mark Andrews, one team with Lamar to Rashad Bateman. That's definitely the stack I'm eyeing at this point of the week, with Elijah Moore as the run back on a lot of those teams.
And if you do need somebody at the cheap end, if you want either low ownership or the salary savings, or just, you know, somebody different, Evan Ingram, $4,900 and plenty of upside. More upside when it's receptions, but obviously if you actually get those targets, it increases the chances of yardage and scoring.
And he's projected at 0% owned on FanDuel here. I think Kevin went in and changed that one to mess with us. He had to.
I don't know.
So
I think the 1% is more of a trolling number.
Yeah, true. So definitely like Mark Ingram. Two other guys on the cheap end, Gerald Everett, $5,200, 3% projected ownership. Jared Cook had 150 yards and a touchdown in 2 meetings with the Raiders last season, and Everett's obviously stepping into Cook's role as the Chargers' lead tight end. So I like Everett's upside in that likely shootout. Then, super deep flyer for, probably bigger tournaments. Mo Alley Cox, $4,800, touchdown scorer. Colts with, one of the highest implied totals of the week. Good price tag, nice usage. I mean, I think at least to open the season, Mo Alley Cox is going to be the clear lead tight end for the Colts because Kylan Granson and Jelani Woods were disappointing this summer. I don't think either guy is ready. So I think you could get Mo Alley Cox, playing 80% of the snaps for the Colts, at least early in the season.
And they re-signed him for a good bit of money. It's not like that he's just still there while they wait for other guys to get healthy. They re-signed him.
Yep.
On defense, Pittsburgh pops in our FanDuel dollars per point projections because they are way cheaper than usual, $3,500. I think that certainly makes them viable. The Bengals matchup is scary, and it certainly might not give you anything, but it's also likely to keep that ownership down. So it's viable. I wouldn't say Pittsburgh's my favorite. I'm leaning toward Miami at 3,800 at home against Mac Jones.
Yeah, me too. I like Miami better. I would never argue against playing a cheap defense in cash. It can definitely work. Pittsburgh would be more of a GPP play for me, though. They still have that strong pass rush. We'll see how much improved the Bengals O-line is, but I do think there's upside to the Steelers in tournaments. But Miami will be my cash game D at $3,800.
And then GPP side, it doesn't look like there's a chalk defense this week, so I don't think I'm actually doing anything different with defenses between the two formats.
Me either. I'm more likely to pay up. I'm more willing to pay up, at least in tournaments. So to me on FanDuel, the Ravens at $4,800. It's the Jets. It's Joe Flacco. They actually just ruled out Dwayne Brown, who was supposed to start at one of the tackle spots for them. So that makes the matchup even better for Baltimore. So I like the Ravens. And on the cheaper side, the Chiefs. I've been trying to get myself to play defenses more in like projected shootouts in tournaments. Because these Ds, the Chiefs can give up 24 points, but if you're getting 40 Kyler Murray dropbacks, that's sack upside, that's interception upside, and if you're getting turnovers, that increases your chance of getting a defensive touchdown. So I do think like the favorites in these projected shootouts, and the Chiefs are clear favorites in this game. I think they can make for good tournament plays.
Yes, I agree. And of course, the sack plays and the turnover plays are the ones that produce those fluky touchdowns. So, you want a defense that's not going to give up a lot of points, but you shouldn't, completely avoid a defense just because the opponent is projected for 20 plus.
Exactly.
Well, that's going to do it for this week's FanDuel show. Head over to DraftSharks.com. You can check out Kevin's articles on playing on FanDuel, got his top picks for cash games and for tournament teams. Jared's got his articles for the DraftKings play as well, top picks in both cash and GPP lineups. And you can play with the lineup generator and make your own lineups. Use some of these guys we talked about, find your own values that maybe we didn't even hit on in the show. It's all there, varied slates for you to check out. So become a DS Insider so you can make use of all of it. For Jared Smola and the entire Draft Sharks crew, I'm Matt Shasta, and thanks so much for swimming with us.